welcome to the May 12th or May 13th if you're in Australia, InterReach webinar. That's great. Our resident Aussie is celebrating appropriately. We are so happy to have some great folks here for a good conversation today. But we will sort of start off with a reminder of the purpose of InterReach. So, of course, we have a dual mission of developing the profession and professional development. So we bring together people who make cross-disciplinary problem solving possible, sharing practices, tools, and ideas, many of them developed and shared by people who are here with us today in the community. And that strengthens our work and build clear, sustainable career paths for boundary spanning roles, many of which exist now and didn't 11 years ago when we started to get together and talk about these things. So we focus on these things together, and we welcome you as always in being part of how we should best do that. This year, as you may know, many has tuned in that this whole series for 2025-26 is celebrating the I2 Insights blog and repository's 10th anniversary. Very exciting. Integration and implementation insights has inspired a lot of us and has been the source of the great guests that we've had in our series of dialogues over the past year and continuing today. So thank you so much to the I2 Insights resource repository and community that has spurred that all of us get to be a part of. As a reminder, if you haven't joined during this series, we are going along with a dialogue format. And so that's going to be a 10-minute presentation by each of our panelists, followed by kind of seamlessly moving into a 15 to 20 minute or 10 to 15 minute dialogue between the two of them, just spurred by their conversations and what they've heard each other say, what comes to mind. And then we'll save about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for community interaction within all of us who have joined here today. So I am very excited to now just give you a very brief overview of the I2 Insights on Integration Frameworks as the topic that joins our esteemed speakers today. So Stephen Crowley from Boise State University is joining us. I'm so excited to see you speak, Steve. I've been a Steve fan for the entire time I've known Team Science exists and have always learned from him. Similarly, Christian Pohl from ETH Zurich, who is a leader as well. Let me, instead of ad-libbing, let me just tell you some actual introductory material about them. So Steve Crowley is chair of the philosophy department at Boise State in Idaho, and he is also a member of the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative. OG, always been helping there. He helps facilitate team science projects as part of the TDI in a variety of areas and works on models of such collaborations and how to support them. And he is who you want in your audience or back pocket anytime you're throwing out new ideas. Best cheerleader for brain explosions and sparks. The kind of fireworks that you saw are potentially actually there. So thank you for everything that you give to the community. And Christian Pohl is an expert in theories, methods, and tools for understanding and navigating transdisciplinary research processes. He was the founding co-director of TDNet of the Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences and is head of TD Lab of the Department of Environmental Systems Science at ETH Zurich. So I have had the opportunity to kind of follow your work from coming out of environmental sciences myself and just see how much you've developed both the profession and contributed to professional development. So he studies transdisciplinary projects in the fields of sustainable development and explores tools to support knowledge co-production. We are so lucky to be joined by the two of these gentlemen and hear from them over the next little bit. So 20 minutes of conversation coming from each of them and then maybe 15 together, and then we will chat. I am going to stop sharing at this point and invite Steve to share his slides and go from there. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve and Christian.
This will totally work any moment now. Okay, I just need to make, here we go. All right, hang on. That didn't look good. I'm going to stop that and try again. And now we will go to slideshow. All right. What I hope is that you all got a very exciting gray screen that says epistemic integration, some musings. So if someone wants to like, okay, I've got two thumbs up. I'm calling that good. I'm a philosopher. That's all the data I can handle for one day. Um, all right. Here's what I'm going to attempt to do he said optimistically in the next 10 minutes. I thought I'd begin with a starting point. The particular model of what's going on with integration that I think got me this invitation. Um, and then I really want to share two new things that are happening in my world that I think that have shifted my thinking about integration in the last year or so, and that I think are energizing in a variety of ways. Um, I want to jump then to some what I'm calling very open questions. I think I just want to acknowledge that one of the payoffs of, I think, the developments in work on integration lately is that we get more. We can try and work on harder questions. And I thought I would end with a final old man muttering. Now that I'm an old man and that I mutter. Um, so 2016, Michael O'Rourke, Chad Goneman, and myself, uh, you know, cooked up the IPO model. And at the time, it felt like it was making progress. So, breaking down the process of integration into one where we paid attention to inputs, to the outputs, and critically to the process that got you from the inputs to the outputs, and drew attention to some of the different questions that arose. Um, yes, I'm going to try and be quick. Folks will stop me as I need. I think a decade ago when we got this out, the question was what's happening here in the process box, and I think that puzzles about that continue. And I want to say some things that I think have happened recently that make me feel like we're making some progress. So there are two new things in my world that I want to share. First of all, and Bethany, apologies for everything I'm about to say that misrepresents your work. You should jump in and correct me shortly. Um, but Bethany Laursen's been doing work on integrative typologies, and that came out in Issues in Interdisciplinary Studies around about a year ago. And I think this is something actually that builds on some of the insights that Christian and Dina Pham and their collaborators mentioned in their I2S post back in the day, but the integration may proceed in stages. We often think about integration as a thing, and one of the things I think Bethany's really done excellently is to remind us that it actually can happen stepwise. And paying attention to how those stages are related can really help us appreciate complex integration. I'm not going to say too much more about that. It's Bethany's work. She's on this call, but I think this capacity to sort of break down what's happening and to look at the parts, I think is a big step forward. The other thing that I've come across recently is I don't have a good word for it right now, so I'm calling it modes of integration. And this is work I've seen talked about. I haven't seen it published anywhere yet, but Annemarie Horn from the University of Utrecht is talking about this. Josh and Michael O'Rourke and Chad Goneman are talking about this. And I think, for me at least, the key is that there are two distinct ways of thinking about integration, as organization or as transformation. And I want to say a little bit more about that because it's stuff I'm a little bit more involved in. So integrate. So like think of, so here's the story about why integration is about organizing. So when we talk about integration, what we're talking about is the coherence or connection of a collection of stuff, right? How much do you know about one part of a collection if you know something about another part? And for me, a classic example of this is GIS systems. That what we're really doing when we use GIS is we're taking a bunch of information we already have that's and stacking it on top of each other in a way that lets us literally see relationships that we might struggle to notice otherwise. And it sure feels to me like GIS integrates our knowledge, spatial knowledge in important ways. But but that feels a lot like organizing, right? We've taken stuff we've already had, we've reorganized it in a way that makes important knowledge relationships more salient. Um, but we also think about integration as transforming, right? So integration is about constitution. Are the inputs to the system incorporated in the output thing? And canonically, often this involves the dissolution of the inputs, which I failed to completely edit here, and I apologize. So where it says old things, read that as inputs. And full disclosure, the flow chart in the upper right-hand corner does not actually track rapid ecological assessment methods. It's just the only flow chart I could find that sort of captured this idea that there are lots and lots of inputs yielding a single output that in some sense coordinates the information, but also in a way that doesn't, that in some sense hides it. It's no longer obvious. But a nice example that Chad Goneman's come up with are rapid assessment methods in ecology, where you input a bunch of data about plant species or other features of the ecology. You run them through a series of standard procedures to yield a single numerical score about the the wetlands ecological health. So in this case, what we're doing when we integrate is we transform. Why I think this is cool. I really feel like there are two things that get me excited working with a model of knowledge. And one is when I feel like it's something people can pick up and use, or at least if we're getting close to that. So I feel like thinking about Bethany's work on topologies or this work on modes moves us a little bit closer to having models that are really useful for practitioners, that they can ask themselves, what is the sort of epistemic product that they're hoping to generate? And that might help them organize their thinking. I'm not sure we're all the way there yet, but it feels like a step in the right direction. The other thing is, I think that's great about these new models is that what I'm calling provocative, right? There's enough detail that we're moving into a time and a place where I think that these insights, they're more testable, you can challenge them, you can improve them. I think it's been hard for a while to really get our claws into integration the way we'd like. And it does seem to me like we're starting to generate the kind of models that just allow richer levels of interaction. Having said all that, one of the bonuses I think of this new area is that we're in a position to suffer more, and suffering is good, right? So just two things that I've realized I'm starting to worry about a lot is just as soon as I've shared I was at, as Bethany mentioned, the the Insights Conference was in Vancouver, British Columbia in the last couple of days, and sharing this work on topologies and modes at that conference led a lot of people to say, but what about? And then suggest new and interesting and different ways that we could think about integration that didn't fit neatly into either of those stories. And I think that's right. And I think that's hopefully partly what's exciting. Is exactly this notion that we're now in a space where new things can happen faster. Something that I'm hoping that I can learn from Christian about is what I'm calling the rest of the iceberg. English-speaking philosopher types tend to focus kind of narrowly on intellectual activity as if it happens in offices without windows in university departments and nowhere else. So two things that I'm trying to think about more are just where is the epistemology in epistemic integration? Is it something that happens in individual minds? Is it something that is related to the artifacts we produce when we're doing knowledge making? And the two stories I told you were all about artifacts. But also, I think it's important to think about communities. And maybe ultimately societies as places that shape and form what's knowable and how it's knowable. Something that's also just started to bug me increasingly is what's the kind of epistemology that we want? In my world, there's a distinction between knowledge how, which is the kind of knowledge that lets you do things, and knowledge that, which is the kind of knowledge that gets put into books and put on shelves. And I'm increasingly thinking that maybe an important part of that I'm increasingly thinking that I tend to think about integration as contributing to knowledge that. I'm not sure that's completely insane, but I think especially when I read Christian stuff, I think a lot more that maybe integration is about knowledge how. It's a very practical thing. And if that's right, I have even more work to do than I initially thought. Um, with those very open questions on the table, let me end with a final old man muttering. Um, this is actually meant to be kind of positive. This feels to me like a really good time to be thinking about integration. As I said, I think our models are getting more practical and they're getting more provocative. Um, and that just means that with a bit of luck, we can generate new insights faster. I think the conversations are going to be, our wheels are not going to spin so much, they're going to grip. And hopefully what that means is that we're in a position to connect our insights, our models, our questions, etc., to other areas of inquiry more fruitfully. I have some references, which is just the blog post that Graham and I did. Just full disclosure, by the way, Graham is not responsible for any of the craziness I just said, but he is probably responsible for anything sensible. This is apparently the 10th anniversary of the IPO model, which I hadn't realized. And shout out to Bethany's paper in Issues in Interdisciplinary Studies. And I will stop sharing. And I hope I brought that in about on time, Dr. Hendren.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Steve. I love all of that. Can't wait to dig in. And looks like it is starting to work for us to see Christian's slides.
Yes, do you see the slides in the right format?
Yes, it
Thank
has
you.
a little option to connect to share, I think. So I'm not entirely sure. It looks like, yes, perfect. Go for it.
So thank you very much, and warm welcome from Europe. It's already 6 or 7 in the evening, so I'm a bit tired. And thank you very much for the invitation. Stephen, I thought perhaps I should have gone first because I didn't do so much homework, didn't have so many new things to say. I basically say what we already said about integrating things. And I didn't think, just to make that comment, I really didn't think about whether it's politically correct in the sense of whatever your government is. I just didn't think about it. I just will say what I don't know. The title is Integrating Things. It has 3 slides. The first one is referring to the same as the IPO model, right, Stephen? It's about what is integration. Integration is basically a process that relates things. I think that's already then my first question to you, that if they're organized or transformed, what are those things? And I think, Stephen, you already said what those things are. You already made that comment. Is it cognitive? Is it things that we know? Is it people? Is it building networks, right? Is it net people and material things? I don't know. It can be so open. At least in the paper we have written, it is so open and so undefined. But I think that was also our aim, was to open thinking and make it as broad as possible, right? Also because I think, in fact, if we do transdisciplinarities or something, it's really about connecting things, cows and water, and sometimes it's about connecting cows and researchers, and sometimes it's about knowledge about cows and knowledge about water runoff, whatever. It can be so different. I really like both definitions, the one of Thomas Jan and colleagues and the one of Michael, because they kind of bring in, as you said before, they bring in the process, what happens in this process, right? Some things are connected through a process. I didn't know, Bethany, that you have organized that process in stages. Shame on me. I think that's very important, right? That we go further steps in organizing the process of integration. Also, the pictures, they basically mean, people can have the same starting point, but they kind of Integration can lead to very different things. That's also from the paper. I think I'm a very pragmatic person. So I think integration should always relate to the purpose that you want to achieve. And I think consensus is a very high investment for an integration. And you have to have very good reasons why you need a consensus in some things. Very often projects in current European environment are starting with the assumption that you first have to create a shared vision in a collective. And when you have that vision, then you can achieve it by modeling or engineering society in that way. I'm super skeptical about that. I don't know whether this vision is really might agree. People might agree on a very abstract level, but as soon as you go further into how to implement that abstract idea, they will disagree. And I also don't. I also think that it is too linear for me that you first need the vision and then you can act based on the system knowledge. I think those things are much more connected, actually. The vision might change by the first move you make in transforming something. So consensus, I think you really have to have good reasons for a consensus. I really like the old paper of Starr and Griesmer of the boundary object, which basically they say, well, people just build a museum for vertebrates, I think, and they just have different interests. And I also like Gabrielle Baumer usually likes to do that if we meet for a joint project, that she says, okay, for the first time, everybody just puts his or her interests on the table. And then once we have those interests, then we see whether we can organize something meaningful as a project, which is a starting point that is super by shared interest and then can go into consensus or whatever it is needed. And then I like Veronica's comment on this. I don't know whether I've understood that correctly, of the systems of thought in reflective equilibrium, where there is no consensus, where you keep different perspectives, but somehow they uh, they have a fruitful exchange among each other. It might change, right? People might change their minds by this exchange without having one big collective thinking. And I mean, this is the picture, yeah, you might know it, where I try to, and that's very Christian, right? To try to connect the thoughts with these little figures. Somehow it's people, us who carry around knowledge and values and interact with material things in the world. And that for me, that makes it usually very down to earth, my thinking. Some people don't like that. They say, oh, the sociologists say, oh, Christian, this is too naive. You should build structures and things like that. This is too, but I like it a lot. And it goes in a direction like Stephen, as you already said. I mean, this integration can, if this is a project, right? And it can happen at so many places, integration. And integration here means that some person might take up an idea of another person and include it in his or her worldview, and this worldview might be changed, or in how she or he perceives the world, right? That's one way of integration. Nobody might realize that integration happened. The person that provided the knowledge might never know that he or she provided the knowledge. And in other cases, it might really be a collective that has a cool process of interacting and then finds a consensus about something. And it really depends on what the purpose is and what you want to achieve. And then I think the really tricky part is then whatever happens, whatever you have integrated in your heads or in your minds, to bring that back. That's the boxes, right? The brownish and reddish and greenish boxes. They symbolize the thought collective of those who didn't go through this integration process. And so how do you convince them that whatever you integrated in your mind is something helpful? That's also, I don't know how to do that. How to transform whole collectives. So that was my short 6 minutes, I think. And with that, I'm happy to go into the discussion.
You are both excellent at time. So now please go ahead and just have a relaxed conversation, the two of you, and we will observe, and I'll just send you a little note in about like 12, 15 minutes to transition.
Stephen, would you like to start or shall I?
I think the only thing I have to say to start with is probably unhelpfully smart-assed, Christian. So if you wanted to start, that would be more constructive.
Okay. I was wondering about whether I understood the organizational transformation correctly. And my question was, what is actually organized and transformed? Is it pieces of knowledge? I was not so sure about when I mean, I think I understood based on your examples, but if you could go more in that direction. What is actually the thing that is organized or transformed?
Yeah, and I feel like this is where so let me do the concrete thing first, right? I think at least so in particular examples, I can generally answer that question. So if I think about the GIS system, it's very, I mean, we were in a world where we had multiple maps, right? But it just turns out that we struggle to carry insight from when we look at one map to when we look at a second map. And so really by creating a resource to in some sense stack these things so that I can look at them both together. So
Mhm.
in that case, we're really taking two epistemic artifacts, map one and map two, and then restructuring them so that we create something that's a little bit closer to a sort of shit, by co-locating them, we're using the fact that they have that same spatial structure. In some sense, the metaphor, stack them on top of each other.
Mhm.
Um, but I think so in a particular case, I can generally tell you what the things being organized are. But this is why there is a big question for me about when I say epistemic or think epistemic, what on God's green earth am I talking about? Because I think you can tell, um, there's a classic example in philosophy about when someone discovers that what people call the morning star and what people call the evening star is actually both Venus, right? And so there's just this sort of sense of like, I mean, my belief structure shifts when I get that identification. It's not like I lose or gain beliefs, but that they've now got more structure. So but is that meaningfully the same kind of organization um, as the kind of map case? I'm not sure, but at least for me, what I've noticed is I used to, yeah, if I start thinking in terms of organization, I can start asking myself what kinds of things promote organization. So are they sort of discovering identities or because it's my day for calling out Bethany's work, the work that Bethany and Michael did on the role of inference. So like connecting, we see connections when we realize that we can combine A and B to conclude C. Um, so it feels productive right now, but but the issue of the what is still very, very hand wavy. And I think it's equally true in the case of the transforming. Again, I think you can typically, for a specific example, you can say, here are the inputs and here, but I think I'm very often reverse engineering what the inputs and outputs must be from the sort of intuition that a certain kind or flavor of integration took place.
May I add something? I think um, I think the transforming has, when we wrote this paper about the integration, I think, or let's say when I think about integration, I very often have this idea in mind that whether it transforms, it's a bit a different understanding of transformation. Whether whatever happens in integration transforms how deep the basic beliefs are that something that something changes that you integrate in your knowledge and belief system. And an example, that's not the transformation you talk about, but that's something that I think is super interesting. If we have modelers, um, and they include new data or no parameters in their models, that doesn't change their models, but it might make them super more encompassing. It's a bit like the GIS. And other, like this, like double and triple loop learning, other information, there are some information that completely confuse my super basic beliefs. And I have to say, I'm so wrong. I don't know, farmers know so much about the world. It's so wrong that science thinks they know something. It's actually the farmers the knowledge on the ground and on the situated knowledge. It's not in the academic system. You can't find it there. And that's so strong that I really have to rethink things totally. And that is in a way um, what I would call transforming, but then it transforms me as the person that integrates or my belief system. So I think that's the way how I try to think about it, or where I see this difference between adding knowledge to something you know and completely destroying your basic beliefs or changing them. But there was a question right in the chat, wasn't there?
I believe you. I will now.
Repko and Joshak method.
Oh, do you want to have a shot at this, or shall I go first,
Yeah, you
Dr.
go first, please.
Would y'all mind rephrasing it just for anybody who might be watching this back who won't see the
No,
chat? That would be great. Thank you.
absolutely not, Dr. Hendren. This is all, I'm going to do everything else in interpretive dance from here on out. So this is from my irony is just getting worse and worse, isn't it? This is from Marie-France, who says the Repko and Shostak method pays particular attention to analyzing conflicts among disciplines to ultimately bring them closer using different techniques. To what extent do you investigate those conflicts while integrating? I think I'm gonna, well, so what I would say is that conflicts are one dimension in which you can see something like what Christian just said. So that if you're fortunate, you get new information and you can just add it to your belief set, right? Uh, and there's work in formal epistemology on belief revision that sort of for those of you who are living in Steve's like way too analytic world. But I think, sometimes you get new information, like Christian said, and you add it to your model. But the model is just enriched, but not fundamentally changed. What conflicts do is they force you to make hard choices. If you're going to deal, once you've noticed the conflict, you've got to address it. And this is exactly where I think, if you look at Christian's multiple elephants in the room, which is a wonderful image, the you know there's no single way to resolve a conflict, but we are kind of on the hook to resolve the conflict, and that can be this can be a sort of a fundamental change to your entire belief structure, right? It could be that you try and let go of scientific knowledge and take more seriously local or situated knowledge. It could, but and sometimes it can be that you let go of the idea that what we need to do to work together is to is in Christian's terms to sort of like get a shared mental model to start with, and we work out the ways in which we can move forward together without having to sort out our mental models. But so what I would say is the presence of conflicts is the most interesting and exciting part of thinking about integration. And it's also the one that gives us the widest variety of options. And you can tell Christian's doing better at it than I am because he's still kept his hair, whereas I've torn all of mine out. And that's what I have to say about conflicts. They're awesome.
Thank you.
And frustrating.
Should I add? Perhaps I don't know a lot about conflicts of different disciplines. So I think what I made my meet in workshops or so might be conflicts over facts. Conflicts over facts, okay. Then I don't know. Perhaps we have to. Actually, I don't know what to do if you have conflicts over facts. Perhaps we have to. I would probably put them on the table so that we have both facts, both viewpoints on what the facts. Is it about facts or the interpretation of facts? I would probably sort that out. What's the facts and what's the interpretation of facts? And then the interpretation of facts might again be different because people have different disciplines in the background. So that's now, about another thing about conflicts. I work in an environmental science department. I don't know whether you know that, but environmental or natural scientists don't have that many conflicts in epistemologies. I think they have all the same. And so they just add. And if I go into a humanities, social science environment, then there are so many schools that fight among each other. And here my approach would be, if there are such schools in a transdisciplinary project, I usually say, why do we have to come to a consensus? Let's keep both. Let's see which one is the fruitful one. Let's keep both. Let's go through the process. Let's take those different viewpoints or perspectives at several points in time and see what I'm a pragmatist, see what they help us to achieve the purpose that we have in mind. And I think Repko and Joshak are a bit different. I think they want to build out of different, I'm not super specialist, but I think they want to build a more comprehensive perspective out of different disciplinary perspectives. And then it's probably about the hard choices that you have to do. The second question is how critical, and I think that goes in that direction, how critical is framing the question to the resulting integration. Does integrating knowledge result in broader audiences having access to that knowledge because some of what is integrated is familiar to them, for instance? I don't know. I mean, in the TD processes I do, let's say the first third of the whole project is about framing the issue. And I think a lot of integration and disintegration and conflicts already happens during this framing thing. And then also the pragmatist point of view is then again, and depending on how you frame it, some of the conflicting people might just step out because it's no longer in their interest to be part of that project. So I think the framing, how critical is the framing? I think it's super critical. Framing the question, framing the issue that you're talking about. Does the integrating knowledge result in broader audience? So that's a really tricky question. I always bring this example which was about the water level of a sea. From a scientific viewpoint, the water level would be 3 meters, would be perfect. And then they included the farmers around it, and it was 4 meters. And the farmers were super happy with 4 meters, or perhaps it was the other way around. I don't know. More interests were addressed by a different level of the water. And so in that case, you cannot see the integration in the knowledge. The knowledge is like the product of a huge process. But what you could see is how well different groups or perspectives were included in the process. By the way, that's super important for PhDs that organize as part of their PhD a transdisciplinary process. That basically means if they produce a product, that's fine for the PhD, but what is super interesting is how they navigated the process of integration, which then means they have to write a chapter in the thesis that describes this process, which is not a paper. So there is something, the process description is something that I try to make a really important product of a transdisciplinary research project. And I then can, on that description of the process, I can see how well they navigated the integration process. So new things are coming out of PhDs. Sorry, there are so many other questions. I give it back to Stephen.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to just Mela, I owe you. But very quickly, Mira, how critical is framing the question? Yeah, Christian's just right. There is nothing more critical. I think this is something that connects up to something Christian has been saying a lot, right? Which is that he's a pragmatist, and we need to think about the purpose. And I'm going to no, I probably will. Right? So you need to think about whether you're doing this I think this is one of the big differences between interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, is that purposes in interdisciplinary work are often academic. And you can see the kinds of products that result from integrations if you look at the philosophy of science literature. Right, there are these like brand new shiny models or theories, and they connect different parts of genetics with each other, and that's great. And often in those cases, framing still matters, but you can often, as Christian said, there's less disagreement in the sciences than you might think. In contrast, I think in the interdisciplinary literature, we're often thinking about integration for the sake of moving some concrete project forward. In my mind, it's more like engineering. We're trying to make the world a better place. And when we're engaged in that integration in the service of that kind of outcome, we often deal with what I think what's called wicked problems. And one of the folks I know, and I recommend you check out his website, Jared Talley. But one of the things he says when he's working with folks around wicked problems is that, I think in Christian's terms, you can, I wrote it down somewhere, you can share an interest, but typically when people turn up to that first meeting, they all turn up with their own version of the problem. And what Jared will tell you is the first and most important thing you need to do is to get everyone to agree on a problem. So I think of that as a framing question. Does integrating knowledge result in broader audiences? I think that's a case-by-case basis. I think it's often the case that integration leads to more complex and subtle understandings, which actually can reduce the number of the audience, because you have to, if you don't have the relevant epistemic tools, the conversation gets hard to follow. Okay, so I've been dodging Mailer's question for the last 5 minutes, apparently. How do you know when knowledge is integrated and who gets to decide? Okay, so I'm just going to go with the smart-ass answer here and say you just feel it. I think there was an American judge who once said of a discussion about pornography, I don't know what it is. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And clearly the person who gets to decide is me. Concretely, I think this loops all the way back to one of my very open questions. Both of these questions feel like sociology of knowledge questions. At the end of the day, a sort of a maximal community has to be convinced, and so we're moving, I would say, into rhetoric or dialectics here, right? These decisions about who's convinced and who has the power to sort of shut down conversations are as much issues about power and about the ability to convince as anything else. So I think so I guess that's both my smart-assed answer and my best attempt at being serious, which is that feels like sociology of knowledge, and that's power, and that's really hard. Dr. Pohl.
No idea what to add.
You all have done such a great job kind of seamlessly bringing in the conversation in the chat. And this has been really great. I'm wondering if anybody wants to raise their hand and ask a question. We've got 11 minutes left, and this is kind of a natural shift to the group discussion point, which both Steve and Christian have already welcomed in. Dr. Crowley, I would love to hear your question.
I want to ask Mailer if she feels at all satisfied with that answer regarding how do you know when knowledge is integrated and who gets to decide, or just what other people think, because it's like Christian and I have been I'm just learning that I don't want to go into theater, because the idea of having an intimate fireside conversation whilst being watched by a lot of people who aren't giving me any feedback is a little bit perturbing. So if Mailer's willing to put herself on the spot, I'd love to hear what she thinks about how do we know whether knowledge is integrated and who gets to decide, or anyone else, or someone else could have a shot at changing the subject.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I appreciate this talk in general, and that you try and take a stab at this question. I don't know that I know. I think you're right that it has to do with power dynamics in terms of who gets to decide. I think what's interesting is thinking about, so what are the outputs that we're looking for? And on some level, is it that we can't know what the outputs are from knowledge integration, because the whole point is that when we do it, it makes something better and novel and newer. And by definition, new is unknowable until it kind of happens. So I don't know that I have an answer. I've just been thinking about it since the conference in general and chatting with Bethany and you.
Um,
I have a follow-up question
oh, sweet. You should do that then, Bethany.
related to that. Well, I was thinking about who decides whether something is integrated. And I really wonder, and I want some specific answers to this question. Who actually asked that question? Like, who actually wants to know whether something is integrated? Because in my experience, for example, reviewing papers or talking with people who review papers, reviewers are one set of people who get to decide whether a knowledge product is adequate or not. I think a lot of times reviewers aren't judging on the basis of how integrated the knowledge is. They're asking something more specific, like, does this particular argument make sense? Did they account for all of the data or perspectives? I'm maybe Christian, you and your faculty, when you're assessing the theses in your department, maybe you're assessing for integration. Yeah, so I'm just curious, what are some examples of people or groups who are actually assessing integration versus some other property that tends to correlate with integration, like novelty or something else?
That's a hard question. And where is Sabine Hoffmann now? She would have to answer it. Actually, how do I assess? Usually, I don't assess the integration, but I assess now that this, if I have to assess a project, then I would see, do they have a plan? Do they have a concept of integration? And do they have tools or methods or approaches that seem to make sense, or that where you could achieve integration? And are the things that they want to integrate actually relevant for the purpose they have in mind? That's the questions I answer. But this is proposals, right? Not papers. And in papers, I never ask that myself. But what I would say, there are different examples of what integration could be. In one of the cases, in Switzerland, one medicine was super well known 15 years ago. And it basically meant that a Swiss animal health person would go to the nomads in the chart, and he would realize that the nomads in the chart wouldn't make a distinction between human health and animal health. He would take that idea from the nomads in the chart and would develop a new field, One Health, in the Western system. So he had integrated this idea to the Western system, right? The nomads would say, "What's happening here? Nothing was integrated in our knowledge." So he took something and integrated it, but he integrated that in a very good way, right? So that's an example of integration where I think the proof that he integrated is that wow effect, and that he does another kind of medicine that integrates human and animal health, and which then has a lot of traction and a lot of people that think, wow, this is great, we should follow that. But the nomadic people would have nothing from that. And in other cases, things are integrated and both sides change a bit. But this is just a distinction, right, of different types of what integration could mean. It doesn't explain how we look at it or how I see it.
Thank you. Chris, would you like to ask a question?
Well, to contribute to the discussion on who thinks that things have been integrated. So Bethany and Steve, they know that I've been giving these little bits of models to researchers that I've been working with who are running projects. I have 8 different projects I've been interviewing PIs, co-PIs, and they're from different disciplines. And I asked them, well, are you integrating? And can you figure out how you're integrating and what does that mean to you? And so it's really kind of a following Shun, like a reflection in action kind of a method about helping them just to see what they're doing. Really, it's like a meta task that for me, making their practice explicit really and this is the feedback I get from them, that they're helping them to really just progress together and think, well, is it worth integrating theoretically, methodologically, the way we present our results, how we're going to give our results back to the community? Do we do that in the same way? Does it make a difference? And so it's really just been a way of reflecting on practice. And so for me, they do it, the interested parties, and they find because I was asking them, they find ways of figuring out for themselves why it's useful. That's it.
Thanks, Chris. I just trying to be quick. I think that's yeah, Bethany, I think it's a great question. When you go looking, it turns out there are lots of, depending on what the project is, you can generally find someone who's got a stake or some interest in that. I think Mira has a nice point in the chat. I think what Chris, I think, just identified a bunch of stakeholders. I think what thing I'd say quickly is, at least for me, and this maybe is the philosopher, but I think about your work with Michael. What your look at the work and see whether it, you can understand it as a series of inferences, right? And I think that often means thinking about rules of reasoning that are sort of more local rather than the kind of thing you get in Logic 101. But I think that I think I want to stop there because there's enough things happening and I'm losing my handle on it all. And I'm like, my clock is flashing at me, so I feel like I should turn it back to either Christian for a last word or Christine for a last word. I will just sort of say, everyone, you're awesome. Thank you for making time today.
Yes, I think that's my last word too. Thank you very much for being here, listening to us, and contributing.
Thank you both so much. This is really fantastic. I will share slides just for a moment to tell you as a final thing what to expect for the coming months. So today was our May 12th or 13th, if you're in Australia, integration frameworks, and you all just made it such a lovely and natural conversation. It was really fantastic. Thanks for everybody who participated in the chat as well. We still have 2 more in this delightful series. June 9th will be Decolonization and Epistemic Justice with Gabriela Alonso Yanez and Basirat Oyalawo. And July 14th is Leadership Practices for Collaborative Teams with Gerald Midgley and Gemma Zhang. So again, all contributors to the wonderful I2 Insights. And thanks to all of you for joining. Thank you, Steve and Christian, for the lovely conversation, all these wonderful ideas, all the collaborators that you made sure to shout out and call into the conversation. Infinitely grateful for this community.